Good morning, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of our gender equity series that began. Today, we will be talking about legal rights of transgender youth with Ruthie Moore. And before we jump in, as always, I'm going to take care of some of the housekeeping items. As participants, you are currently in listen-only mode, but we will have time for comments, questions. So feel free throughout the presentation to pop those in your questions or chat feature. Or if you have a working microphone, you can also raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can communicate with us that way as well. This webinar, along with the 2 webinars from yesterday, were recorded and they will be posted to the ICSPS website later this week for you to review and share with any interested colleagues. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ruthie Moore.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to part number 3 of this wonderful series. Today, we are going to present from a legal framework. And the first workshop was creating affirming learning environments. And that is the foundational workshop. The second one is more specifically geared toward transgender and gender expansive students. And this third workshop is where we sort of dive into some of the legal landscape related to the legal rights of transgender youth. So my name is Ruthie Moore. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And if y'all have been in the other 2 workshops, then you know how important it is to introduce yourselves with your pronouns. Because remember, that is an indication to those around you that, okay, this is a safe person that I can talk to who would understand if my pronouns don't match what would be considered to be the quote unquote norm. And so a simple change like that is very effective. So yesterday in the first presentation, I went over a little bit about PHIMC and the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance, or ISSA, as we like to call it. And so just as a refresh, I only have a couple of slides that explain that, but before we do that, I want to go over some of our learning objectives. So to understand the legal landscape around transgender students' rights at the state and federal level, learn about current legislation in Illinois, and to discuss implemented administrative procedures from Illinois districts for transgender student support. So we'll have some examples of what some districts across the state are doing. Now, we also do have some personal stories from some young people embedded into the meeting. So about PHIMC, we enhance the capacity of public health and healthcare systems to help promote equity and expand access to services. So we primarily impact organizations in 4 ways at PHIMC, and that is through organizational development, fiscal management, systems transformation, and program implementation. And so PHIMC is the sort of like the parent company to the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance. And the PHIMC provides all 4 of those services to ISSA: organizational development, fiscal management, systems transformation, and program implementation. Here we go. And we do that to strengthen the public health infrastructure. So the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance. So the mission of the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance is to promote safety, support, and healthy development for LGBTQ+ youth in Illinois schools and communities through advocacy, education, youth organizing, and research. Now, so the first thing that we want to talk about has to do with disproportionate discipline. And so LGBTQ young people are 3 times more likely to be sanctioned in schools. They also report that 15% have been prevented from wearing clothes that support LGBTQ issues. 9% report being disciplined. And when we think about disproportionate discipline, what are some reasons why discipline looks disproportionate amongst LGBTQ young people? Can put it in the chat if you have an inkling or if you feel like you want to interact today. So LGBTQ youth are 3 times more likely to be involved in the juvenile or criminal justice system. Now, this is important to note because one thing we have to take into consideration is that youth of color are even more disproportionately impacted by this. And so one thing to consider is that if young people who identify as LGBTQ plus are sanctioned 3 times more in school, then youth of color, Black and brown youth, are sanctioned at an even higher rate. And so that is the way that we want to also think in context of disproportionate discipline and how it affects young people. And if any of these slides are intriguing, feel free to take any photos of them. So when I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I have a video, and when I share it back, I'll be in a different presentation. And I'm hoping that will work out the lag in the audio. So give me a moment for that. Okay, I'm going to share it back.
Teenage years weren't easy for me. Entering high school, not having anyone in my corner but mom, who at the time only tolerated my decision rather than accept it and embraced it. Freshman year went on forever, it seemed. Hell week was like hell years for me. Being one of my school's most flamboyant and proudly gay students, I surely wasn't hard to miss. Imagine, faggot, sissy, geechee, as you walk down the corridor, eyes on the floor. See the class one, next, pulling their legs away on you. Hear the walls talking all at once, so you can't make out the words. You hear the footsteps pacing as the chase begins. Your heart pounding, your eyes swelling as you reach for your keys and the door shuts behind you. And you see it? The corridor, the floor, the legs, the walls, the dress. Are you the one with the problem? Crazy thing is, it wasn't always just my peers. Sometimes it was the faculty and staff who laughed or snickered at me just for being me. Things only got harder when I became transgender. Hell just got harder. Until one day, I finally said no more. I was there, sitting in Developmental Street, when as usual, Mr. Ellis placed a known homophobe next to me, and I heard that word again. Oh man, I gotta sit next to this faggot. I stood up and told him I'm no faggot, which ended like so many future encounters would in a fight. I was suspended often, so often that the dean called me in his office one day in a roundabout way, suggested that A, I either go to another school, one that will accept me and my lifestyle, or B, be expelled. I chose C, leaving and never looking back. At that rebellious and stubborn age, I didn't realize how hard life would be without a high school diploma. How jobs would barely look at you without that act. How being trans and employment doesn't go hand in hand. Now that I'm older, I often look back and wonder, could I have handled things differently? Would I be in college by now? Would I have a successful career? But then I think about the administration, the faculty, the teachers, and how differently they could have handled things. Now that I'm older, I realize that I handled the situation as best as I could, but that I shouldn't have had to handle it alone.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, so any thoughts, comments about the video? So when we think in terms of disproportionate discipline, one thing to note is what Megan said about, I realized I shouldn't have had to handle it at all. And so as adults, we have to take on the role to make sure that young people are supported. In the story, Megan said that the teacher set them next to a known homophobe. And so as adults, oftentimes it is up to us to make sure that young people are in environments where they feel safe and where they feel supported. And so Megan's story is an example of school pushout. And we talked about school pushout a little bit yesterday, but school pushout is directly related to negative life outcomes. So Megan talked about how hard it was to get a job without a high school diploma. And so when young people face school pushout, where do they oftentimes end up and what are their lives like? And so when we see that young people who are LGBTQ are 3 times more likely to be involved in the juvenile or criminal justice system, we can look at school pushout in this lens also. So when young people are pushed out of school, where do they often end up? Okay. So when we think of the rights of LGBTQ young people, how are the rights protected? So we like to break it down, starting from the small to the large, the micro to the macro. So we have school, district, state, and federal. Now, when we think in terms of the rights in schools, what's the mission? What are the values? What's the learning philosophy at the school? What type of environment has been created? Are there administrative policies in place? When we think in terms of a district level, we think of equal education opportunities, anti-discrimination, bullying, harassment. Here in Illinois on a state level, we have the Illinois Human Rights Act, we have the Illinois Prevent School Violence Act, the conversion therapy ban. We're going to hone in on those 3 state level pieces a little bit later on in the PD. And on a federal level, we have Title IX, we have FERPA, the Federal Education Rights Privacy Act, and the Equal Access Act. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into those specific protections. Okay. So the United States is divided up into the circuit courts. And so here, number 7 is where Illinois falls within the court system. So this is on a federal level how things are divided. So on a federal level, when we think of FERPA, so FERPA protects the privacy of personal records and educational records. And often it prevents the release of this without consent. So FERPA gives parents certain rights with respect to their children's educational records. And these rights transfer to the student when they reach age 18 or attends a school beyond the high school level. So on a federal level, the first thing to think about is FERPA and student educational rights. So next, we talk about the Equal Access Act. And this applies to public secondary schools that receive federal funding and allow at least one student-led non-curricular club that meets outside of class time. So requires all school-affiliated organizations, such as GSAs or gay-straight alliances, to be treated equally. And this means that schools cannot ban certain groups or single them out. So what is a one student-led non-curricular activity? This could be chess club, model building, a political club, anything non-curricular. Something like a French club could possibly be considered to be curricular. So in that case, it would have to be kind of noted separately. So from the Equal Access Act, we look at Title IX. So the Department of Education provides for all students, including transgender and gender non-conforming students. And so we'll spend a little bit more time talking about Title IX. So I'm going to pause and check the questions box. Okay, so difficulty here. Okay, so I see about the captions on the videos, duly noted, Bonnie Miller, as well as this happens because they're othering. Okay, so I will keep going. So Doe versus Township High School, District 211. So this, I'm going to take you through this case, and it'll give us insight into how a law was enforced. So 2013, student A requests support, is denied access to locker room, and files a complaint with the Department of Education. Then 2014, the Department of Education investigates her complaint and attempts to settle with District 211. 2015, the Department of Education finds District 211 in violation of Title IX due to lack of locker room access. 2016, the district complies with the settlement. Parents of some cisgender students, and remember we talked about cisgender, filed a federal complaint against the Department of Education and District 211. The magistrate judge finds for District 211, and we will have an opinion or a quote from the judge in a subsequent slide. In 2017, the magistrate judge delays the hearing pending the decision in the Whittaker case. And we will talk about the Whittaker case. So here is the opinion from the judge. High school students do not have a constitutional right not to share restrooms or locker rooms with transgender students whose sex assigned at birth is different from theirs. Sharing a restroom or locker room with a transgender student does not create a severe, pervasive, or objectively offensive hostile environment. Okay. So this is the opinion from the judge in the District 211, and this is parents and students for privacy. This is when the parents and the students sued the district because they felt like their cisgendered students' privacy rights were being violated. And so this is what Judge Gilbert's opinion to the parents for denying their case. And so we made reference to a Whittaker versus Kenosha in the previous slide related to this case right here of Doe versus Township in District 211. So the Whittaker case, in a resounding legal victory for a Wisconsin student, Ash Whittaker, the Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit, and remember, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, we fall under the 7th Circuit, ruled that federal laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex protect transgender students and require schools to allow transgender students access the restrooms that correspond with their gender identity. And so the Doe versus Township 211 case was pending what happened with this Whittaker versus Kenosha. And the Whittaker versus Kenosha held that both Title IX and the US Constitution required gender-affirming restroom access for trans students. And so this is major legislation. And so if you have any interest in the foundation for some of the legal cases that set the precedent today, these are some of the ones. So Illinois protections. So here in Illinois, we're going to talk about these 3 protections. The first one is the Prevent School Violence Act. And this particular act seeks to prevent violence from occurring in school by addressing root causes of violence. This states that bullying is prohibited in all school districts on the basis of actual or perceived gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. And in our other trainings, we talked about what is gender identity, what is gender expression, and what is sexual orientation. And gender identity is how you identify. Gender expression is how you express your gender, how you walk, how you talk, how you dress. And sexual orientation is who do you want to take to the movies? So that is how the Prevent School Violence Act factors in as a protection. The conversion ban therapy states that under no circumstances shall a mental health provider, including school psychologists and licensed school social workers, engage in sexual orientation change efforts with a person under the age of 18. This includes efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions. So this was signed into law by Governor Bruce Rauner in August of 2015. And one thing that we have to note is that some of the language in the conversion ban therapy is a part of the Illinois Human Rights Act, which we will talk about right now. So the Illinois Human Rights Act protects all Illinois students from discrimination. And this is discrimination from sexual orientation, gender identity, and other classifications. So it states that schools cannot exclude students from school or extracurricular activities because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, when we think of the Illinois Human Rights Act, the Prevent School Violence Act, and the Conversion Therapy Ban, these are all three of these work together to form the basis of protection, not only for LGBT students, but for all students. So I will check the chat for any questions or comments. Okay. Okay, so Midday versus District 211. So now this just gives more insight into the District 211 case that we talked about a little bit earlier. So District 211 senior Nova Midday has been fighting for unrestricted locker room use since her sophomore year. In late November 2017, Midday filed a lawsuit against Township High School District 211, saying they violated the Illinois Human Rights Act by treating her differently from other female students and requiring her to dress behind privacy curtains in the locker room. Okay, so here is another case, and a quote. So Mcrae versus Williamsville. Now, the student, their quote was, "I am very pleased that we were able to come to an agreement, mostly because it's going to benefit other students like myself," says Alex. By putting in this reasonable policy in place, all students will be protected, including future transgender students. So this particular case ended with district number 15. They implemented a district-wide administrative procedure as part of the settlement that they reached with the Illinois Department of Human Rights. Now, the Illinois State Board of Education. Now, one thing that, one way at the district level to find out what the educational opportunity policy is to check the website. And so district websites have their 710 equal educational opportunity policies posted. And so if you are ever curious about what does my district or what does another district's policy say, you can always look at the district website to find out. So Berwyn South District 100. So what did they do? So pre-K through 8 district, they implemented a board-supported administrative procedure for transgender student support. And that was in 2015, 2016. In 2016 and 17, they examined curriculum to ensure that LGBTQ+ identities were represented. And so a quote from the board member says, "You know, all kids are going to have a lot of challenges as they grow up. I don't want our school district to be one of those challenges they had to overcome." And so this is an example of a school district being like, you know what, let's just go ahead and implement a policy on an administrative level. And implementing that policy then led to them examining their curriculum. And remember, LGBTQ+ identities can be represented in a myriad of ways throughout curriculum. So it's small things and little changes like that that help to create environments for young people to feel supported and thrive. So another example, Harlem District 122. So this district also passed, approved an administrative procedure for transgender student support. And a quote from the superintendent: "As a leader of a public school system, we educate every single child. And that seems cliche, but it's very difficult to do when you're not honoring every child in front of you." And so at the very beginning of creating affirming learning environments, we reflected on a quote by Adrienne Rich that talked about psychic disequilibrium. And I told you about how I experienced that when I learned about American history from the lens of Columbus, from a different perspective than what I had been taught when I was younger. And so when we put forth an effort to honor every child that's in front of us, then that means that we provide support for all young people. And so we always, as adults, remember, we hold power over young people. And so we want them to see themselves reflected back. So Chicago Public Schools revised guidelines. So what does CPS do? So CPS guidelines regarding the support of transgender and gender non-conforming students. So CPS implemented this, and this policy applies to staff, parents, and visitors. And so when we think of some of the protections for transgender and gender expansive young people, gender nonconforming. What is going on in Illinois? So one lens to look at the legal protections related to LGBTQ plus people and young people is to look at the state level. And so here in Illinois, one thing that we have is the Illinois Vital Records Act. And I know yesterday we kind of touched on legal transitions and what that means for gender markers and birth certificates and things like that. So in 2017, this was signed into law, and it removes the surgery standard to be consistent with federal standards of appropriate clinical treatment for gender transition. This allows for individuals to change the gender marker on Illinois birth certificates without proof of surgery, instead requiring a declaration from a licensed medical or mental health professional that the individual has undergone clinically appropriate treatment. Modernizes the language sex change to change of sex designation. And so if you want to know more about HB 1785, just Google it. So why is a birth certificate important? So some common situations where a birth certificate is required. So in elementary or secondary school in Illinois, you must provide your child's birth certificate within 30 days to verify their identity. In Illinois, if you want to get your first passport, you have to show a state ID or a driver's license and your birth certificate. In Illinois, if you are applying for a mortgage from a private bank, you must show your birth certificate. And a person starting a new job may be asked to provide their birth certificate or show other forms of identification. So this is important because 32% of individuals who have shown IDs with a name or gender that didn't match their presentation reported negative experiences, such as being harassed, denied services, or attacked. And so when your presentation doesn't match your ID, think about the effects that has on a person. And so that is why a birth certificate is important, because we use them and we need them in a lot of critical situations. So the Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities Act. So this was signed into law in 2017. And it authorizes providers who are counseling minors without parental consent to use their judgment and experience to continue or discontinue counseling the minor without parental consent. And so what does this mean in terms of a young person who is experiencing mental health issues? So if a young person is identified as LGBTQ and they are seeking counseling services because they might not feel accepted at home or at school or in whatever environment, this particular act says that the service provider who is providing the counseling can use their professional judgment to continue the counseling without the parents' consent. So they might say, you know what, in this case, your parents, I don't need their consent because me getting parental consent might disclose something that that I don't think in my professional judgment your parents should know. So this particular act also increased the number of sessions that a provider who is counseling a minor between ages 12 and 17 to 8 90-minute sessions rather than 5 45-minute sessions. And so we also have to consider the role of insurance and the role of access related to these services. So I'm going to pause for questions and comments. Okay, I don't see anything in the chat. Let me check the questions. Okay. I don't see any questions. Okay, so what does all this mean? What do all these protections, how do they all interplay? What does it mean? So essentially, students have the right to privacy about their transgender or gender non-conforming identity. Students have the right to be addressed by a name and pronoun that correspond with their gender identity. Students have the right to use the facilities, i.e. the bathroom, the locker rooms, that correspond with their gender identity. And none of these rights are dependent on legal or medical transitions. So that is important because they used to be contingent upon that. So students can do all three of these things without undergoing a legal or medical transition. And remember, we talked about that transitions are generally thought of in three distinct parts. We have medical transitions, legal transitions, and social transitions. And most young people start their transitions socially. And so a student has the right to privacy about their gender identity. They have the right to be called whatever pronoun that corresponds with their gender identity. And they also have the right to use whatever facilities they want to use. And those rights are not dependent on legal or medical transitions. And remember, most young people start their transitions socially. So that is why it was important for the legal definitions to be updated to include social, because legal and medical transitions are not where a lot of young people are at with their identity development. And so I will pause for any final questions, comments, or concerns before I move to the last slide. Okay. Here are some resources, some organizations that we work with. And lastly, I have a survey. If you have any feedback, if you are seeking additional information, please check out the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance website. And it will link to some other resources that we have available. I'm going to stop sharing my screen Thank you so much, everyone, for attending the 3 sessions. I'm going to send Brittany all of these, a link to all of these PowerPoints. And so they'll be uploaded into a Google Drive folder. And so because they are pretty, they're pretty big files, you'll have to download it. Okay, go ahead, Brittany.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, Ruthie, thank you so much for the information you've shared with us. And yes, all 3 parts of this series will be uploaded to the ICSPS website. For those of you who may have missed 1 or 2 of them or would like to refer back to them, as well as the PowerPoints and resources shared. So thank you again, Ruthie, for the wonderful information. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. And yeah, have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you. You too.